Thanks a lot. All right, very quickly, let me just do a quick survey. I love doing surveys to find out where you guys are at. And how many folks here have been in the hobby for under 2 years? All right, that's awesome. How about 2 years to 10 years? Between 2 and 10? Okay, good group. 10 to 20? 10 to 20 years? Very good. How about 20 to 40? Very cool. Over 40? Every now and then I'll get someone. Very nice, very nice. And what type, who's keeping planted tanks? Wow, okay, very, very good. Who has African cichlids? Very, very good. American or South American, Central? Good. Betta fish? Bettas? Community fish? Very good. Planted communities. Very good. Okay, good. I've got a great mix in here. Okay, good. Give me a feel for what's going on here. So the topic is maximizing fish health, personal enjoyment. As a YouTuber, I get a lot of people reaching out to me and asking me questions. Now, let me make one thing real clear. A lot of you in here know more about fish than I do. Okay, and I've said this many times. I'm not a fish guru. I have been in it for a long time. I'm always learning, always open to ideas. But if you have an idea that you want to share with me, I very much want to hear it because I'm always learning and always getting new ways of doing things. I think the second you think you know it all, you start getting real stupid real fast, right? That's just my my theory, maybe my observation. One of the things I hear from a lot of folks is a desperation. Like they contact me, Ben, help me. And, I can't see their tank, right? But they'll try and describe it. You probably had this happen as a YouTuber. I woke up this morning and one of my fish is dead. What do you think happened? It's like, no picture, no video, no autopsy report. Most of you are familiar with me. How many of you were familiar with me before today? Some of you, okay. I'm known mostly as a cichlid guy because of my background, but in the last couple of years, since coming to Tennessee, I was originally in California, but since coming to Tennessee, I've diversified. But I'm still sort of considered a cichlid guy. I mean, I'm ben.o.cichlid on Facebook. I'm ben.o.cichlid on Instagram. My email is ben.o.cichlid. So yeah, people think of me as a cichlid guy, but I understand it. And I thought about changing those names, but I don't know whatever happened to ben.o.cichlid. At any rate, I've gotten into a lot of diversity. I now have betta tanks. I have planted communities. I have live bears. I have a couple Oscars that I'm entirely in love with. And so I've really diversified. I've got a planted tank. I mean, these are things that if 3 years ago you would have asked me, because I was the big aggressive fish guy. So if you'd asked me about 2 or 3 years ago, are you going to have these kind of tanks? I said, no. That's for other people. That's not for me. And now I'm just completely in love with these things. Like I put out a series on getting rid of the black algae in my tank. That was like a great victory. So that's sort of where I live now. I even get pumped up now about something as simple as a snail. I've got these great pagoda snails, and I'm like, wow, these guys are awesome. And I had one, and now I've got a bunch. So learning about how they don't need to have like a partner, and it was like amazing for me to learn this stuff, right? Learning about plants that don't need to be in the substrate versus, your nubias. All this is just has kept me kind of into it, right? At a time when maybe I would be waning a little bit, right? In my overall. Plus, how do I keep the channel fresh? Right? How many times can I talk about a water change? About the nitrogen cycle, about curbing aggression. I mean, there's so many, and I always love talking about these topics, and it's always new when I approach them again because I've learned something in the interim, but I really needed to get some different angles. Right? It must have worked because the channel keeps growing to some degree, so. I'm not probably that popular with your high-end media people that try and sell you a little bucket of media for $50, because I'm all about sponges and deep substrate. I mean, I think a deep sand substrate that you leave relatively alone is going to be your best biomedia. It is stable. You just don't mess with it. and it grows. It grows, right? If you don't agree with me, I'd love to hear your case. Send me an email. I will reply to you. But I do use deep substrates, and I use primarily sponges as my media, as my, instead of ceramic balls and things of this nature, right? I use, again, from Swiss Tropicals. They're not cheap, but they do a good job. I have them in a couple DIY sumps that I've made where the water pours in, goes through three levels of sponge, right? And then gets pumped back to the tank. The simplest sump you've ever seen. I'm not getting an offer by CCAM to represent Matrix. And you know what? If you like Matrix, Biohome, right? All these types of things, and it works for you, that's awesome. Totally okay, right? I mean, if it's working, it's working. Let's see here. Here's my YouTube banner, and let's talk a little bit about the key subject here. I get a lot of communication from folks that were knocked out of the hobby for some reason, for a variety of reasons usually, and folks that have returned to the hobby. And one of the coolest emails I get is I had left the hobby and I watched one of your videos and I decided to jump back in. I think that's amazing for a YouTuber to hear that. Anybody here ever hit burnout on the hobby? You been there? Been there? Okay. I've been close to it. Where I had going back about maybe 5.5 years, I had a die-off due to disease. I had and it was one of those things where every morning you come down and there's another one turned over. And I couldn't get a handle on it, right? Colomaris. And it looked like fungus. So I treated fungus. I looked like velvet, treated for velvet. It looked like all these things. And then finally, I realized what it was, and I hit it with the right stuff, and it stopped it. But I was like this close to saying, man, I'm done. I'm on YouTube. I've got to like now show my tank with 60% less fish. So we live like in a glass box when you're on YouTube, right? Everything's out there. And I had no one to blame but myself. I violated best practices. I brought some fish in. I thought they looked fine. So I used a shorter quarantine period than I would normally. And lo and behold, guess what? Dumped a whole bunch of Colomaris into my main tank. So who do I got to blame? Nobody. Disasters, disease disasters, equipment disasters, right? Anybody here have an equipment disaster or a tank failure? Anybody ever have a tank bust on them? Anybody know Adam C? Adam C on YouTube? Great guy, 300-gallon from Marineland. The front bust open like after about 6 months. Full of giant cichlids. So you have these kind of things will kick you back. And let me tell you, I admire those of you who get back on the horse and go, okay, let me mop all this up. Let me clean up the glass and figure out how to get back into this thing, right? Disease, of course, I just talked about. Unexplained fish death. That's the one that really gets people. It's like, I don't know what's going on. And usually that's followed by what comment when they reach out to me? What do they normally say when they tell you something like that? My water is perfect, right? Don't they always say that? I tested my water, it's perfect every single time, right? And they can't, I don't know what's happening. They're just dying every day. There's a new dead one. I don't know what's happening. And that one drives people crazy. Here's one that almost drove me nuts. You have I changed the outputs of a filter so that it wasn't breaking up the surface. I was trying to get a circular motion in the aquarium. And I'd watched another guy's video. I had a tank that was doing great. All the fish are thriving, they're colorful, they're beautiful, right? But here I go, changing something when something's working, right? Why change something when things are working? But here I go, let me go do it. So I changed the outputs, and what I did unknowingly was I stopped breaking up the surface of the tank. And the next morning I get up and like 5 of my biggest fish are dead. The ones with the highest O2 requirements, right, are belly up. And it's just like, what? And I couldn't figure out what it was because the other fish that were left were fine. There was enough dissolved oxygen for those fish to still be alive, right? So you'll have a die-off to the point where the available oxygen can keep the other one surviving. So now you're scratching your head going, the other ones look great. My water parameters are perfect. Why are they? And then I realized, you know what? What did I do? You go back and look at what you changed, which is why I always encourage people to keep a log of everything they do. Changed media in the filter, right? Changed your lighting, changed your anything. Write it down with a date. And you can go back and go, I changed those outputs. And I basically strangled my fish. I cut their oxygen off. And of course, who dies first? The biggest and the most beautiful ones. I had a Fusco, and if somebody's familiar with a Fusco, beautiful fish, was the only Fusco I've ever seen or had that had a lot of red in his body. And man, I hated losing that guy. Unexplained fish death, that's a big one that I hear a lot of. Aggression, for cichlid keepers, you know what I'm talking about, right? You go to bed, everything's great. Come down the next morning, 2 or 3 fish are like torn to shreds. You have no idea what happened. This is what kicks a lot of folks out of the cichlid, out of keeping cichlids. In some cases, out of the hobby. They just get they get tired of fish getting torn to bits. For some reason, I have found a combination of African cichlids right now in a big enough tank. It's 7 feet across, 300 gallons, and they're okay. They get along. But I've said this many times that you have no idea, you never know when that little switch is going to flip in their head, and they just lose it. And so you got to be always on your toes. Always have a spare tank ready to go. Have some media that's sitting in another filter that you can pull out to set up a filter real quick if you need it, right? So just some of the safeguards. But a jerkfish, that'll do it. That'll take the joy out of it. Anybody here have multiple tank syndrome? Who has who has more than 10? Who has, I don't know, where do you draw the line on multiple tank syndrome? Is it 10 tanks, 20 tanks? 10? 10's the, it's okay. Okay. So the stack from Florida. Okay. So whose house is a fish room? Okay, so the whole house has become a fish room. Okay, and the yard, your ponds. Okay, good. Okay, that's probably that's multiple tank syndrome. Who has more than 10 tanks? Very, very good. More than 20? More than 30? Maybe. How many fish do you have? I don't know. All right. Well, multiple tank syndrome, it's a good thing. It's a good thing if you are automating as you go, right? So you have like water changing that is done sort of automatically with plumbing but if you get to a point where, and this is something that I've talked about in those videos that you see, the burnout videos, you get to a point where it starts to slip from fun and into work. And you start to cringe a little bit thinking about what you need to do. And you need to do it. I need to go spend 4 hours and do this maintenance. But you always find something else that you need to get to first. And the tanks start to get a bit neglected. And then what happens? You have a crash. And that'll knock people out very often. So it's maintaining balance, I think, is really, really key, is being able to maintain balance. And I had balance, and then I got a granddaughter. And so that threw the balance out, because 3 mornings a week for 3 hours, I'm over at my granddaughter's house helping out, right? And having a great old time that I'm not going to ever compromise on, right? So those are mornings where I might have been filming videos, where I might have been working on tanks, things like that, right? So right when I was about to build a rack and do a couple other things, I said, no, because where's that time going to come from? Who's going to take the cut? Where's the cut going to come? Am I going to stop riding my bike? Am I going to stop spending time with my family? Where's the cut going to come from? So when people tell me they're feeling like on the edge of burnout, I always suggest that they go back to where they were last having the most fun and recreate those circumstances in their fish keeping. So you tell someone that has 12 tanks, when were you having fun? He goes, man, when I had 5 tanks and they were community tanks. And I said, look, it's going to sound kind of wild, but maybe you need to sell 7 tanks and get back to where you were having. Now, I'm not picking on her. I just, and don't go back on the right home. Don't go. Now, Ben said, sometimes you have to do that, or you leave the hobby. You get to a point where you go, I'm just going to sell it all off, and just leave the hobby. I had that option when I left California about 3 years ago. I sold everything, tanks, fish. It was like a parade of people coming through off of Craigslist and just nonstop. And everything got sold. Every last thing got sold. And so I arrived here and I said, okay, what do I do now? Do I continue? Or do I close that chapter? Or what do I? And nah, I needed my fish. I've had fish since I was 6. 68 now. So that's a lot of years of fish keeping. I've had gaps in there where I didn't have fish, or job, right? I had to travel. And then I made the mistake of like buying one of my sons a tank. And what happens when you buy your kids a pet? What happens? It becomes your, thank you, it becomes your pet eventually. I've had parrots and snakes and rats. So at any rate, so cutting things back. Now the other thing that I'm very adamant about are trolls. And this is why groups like this are so vital to the hobby, because people actually get together and help each other. Unfortunately, whether you're looking at forums or YouTube or Facebook, Instagram, there are a lot of folks out there that operate behind what I call keyboard courage, and they will attack other people about their setup, about their fish selection, about how they're doing things, and some folks actually get so hurt by this that they either leave YouTube or they leave the hobby. They just go, forget it, I'm not going to do this anymore, and they end up like what this video was about. They end up just giving away their tank or putting it on Craigslist and saying, I don't want to do this anymore. So I have a Facebook group, and that is, and also for the most part, my YouTube channel, any trolling, any attacks on individuals are immediately blocked. And you can tell a person a lot of different ways that you don't like their fish selection. Like in the cichlid world, some people will keep Mabuna and predators, haps, right, and peacocks all in the same tank. And there are some people that they see that and they go into some sort of like shock, right? They can't, or they see a hybrid and they lose their mind. What is that? What's that OB doing in there? Right. And so those kind of folks are just not allowed on any of the forums I participate in because they don't help. You see, this young fish keeper went out there and saw a pretty fish, an OB, brought it home, put in his tank, so happy and so proud, posts the video, and then gets, filleted online. A lot of ways you can tell a person to, hey, keep an eye on that fish. OBs can be a little nuts. You might not, don't breed them with some of your other fish and then sell them as red empresses, because they're not. They're going to have that OB blood in there. So there's a lot of ways of doing that. My stated goal, my stated purpose in having these forums that I have is to help the future of the hobby. I want the hobby to grow, and the hobby is going to grow through us, like helping other folks, but mostly through young guys and gals. That's how it's going to grow. And if they want to go and buy some glowfish at PetSmart, and then send me an email about it, I'm going to talk to them about it. Because that, to me, that's a segue fish to another type of aquarium, right? If you have one betta and a 2-gallon, and you have a question for me, I'm going to treat you with as much respect as that person that has 300 tanks. You see what I'm saying? Because that's the future of the hobby. I mentioned in one video, in a video a while back, that you don't know if that young fish keeper is the fish keeper that's that someday is going to buy your local fish store and keep you from going out of business. You don't know that. So we have to really handle these folks, talk with them in a way that's respectful and polite, even if what you're seeing makes you cringe. And I have seen things that have made me cringe. And I said, okay, well, let's take a step back. I use this picture a lot. This is my granddaughter. This is a while back. She's a little bit bigger than this now, but that's the future of fish keeping. And the tips I give most frequently, about, I'm sorry? Oh, you guys see her? Oh, there she is.
It looks like a tattoo on your arm for a while.
That's good. That's real good. So the tips, I should have positioned this differently. So the tips I give most frequently, cutting things back to where it was fun. If you're losing some of the joy, cut back to where it was fun. Be sure that you've got that life balance. And if it ever starts to feel like work, like how many here, let's be honest, how many in here when you work on your tank actually enjoy the heck out of it? Very good. How many actually feel there's a therapy involved in that? I do. You get, there's no politics, there's no religion, there's no nothing that could be divisive, right? There's no racial issues in that tank. It's just like, I got to get the water change done. I'm going to do some vacuuming. I'm going to work on some filters, right? And so you're disconnected from noise that might be going on out there, and you're in that world. So it's very therapeutic. And I've worked with individuals that have had PTSD, and they've gone to a practitioner who told them, I could get you on this drug, or you could try fish keeping first. Fish keeping has, except for the impact on your wallet, it has far less side effects, I think, than these kinds of drugs. So definitely, this is why this is another thing that can happen sometimes too. Is people will they'll look at a YouTube channel and they'll become disenchanted a little bit. Like, oh man, I've got this little old tank. I can't get my water that clear. Why do my plants die? Like they're chasing something that they see on YouTube, not realizing that person is sponsored, and they're getting $150 in plants delivered to them every week, and they swap the plants out. You're not seeing them actually yellow and brown, and they just swap them out. And a lot of those big tanks and the fancy filtration, all the other stuff, right? It was usually given to them. So these folks will get a little bit disenchanted sometimes. So one of the things I stress with people is, don't worry about what you see on the internet. Just enjoy your tank. And if it gives you joy and pleasure, that's the right tank for you. It's not, now it doesn't mean you don't strive for more, because you should always be trying to strive for something. But also work on just being really content with your setup. Otherwise, it just never ends, right? You could just never end, always chasing something. And I'll tell you, some of the biggest mistakes I've made that have cost me the most have been trying to chase something, like the latest filter, the latest additive, the latest this or that, right? And again, messing with a working setup when you shouldn't. You should leave things that are working alone, right? Now, this is going to seem a little contradictory. On the one hand, I tell you, cut back to where you're having fun if you're starting to burn out. On the other hand, diversity, which means, wait a minute, does that mean I'm going to be adding more stuff? So for me, don't get me wrong, if I had to cut everything back, it would be to African cichlids. That's where I sort of live and die, okay? That's the hill. That's the hill I'll die on. But being able to add to that, the planted tanks, the betta. I made a little betta duplex with a tank divider. I took a 29. These betta are like in paradise, right, for bettas, considering the cup I bought them in. Having a tank of live bears and finding fry like every other day, right, living up in the Sprite that's floating at the top. Right? I mean, this stuff is like, I'll bring my wife, my poor wife, I'll drag her down to the garage and go, girl, you got to see this snail. And she's like, what do you, lose your mind? Diversity, that's really helped with me a lot. And another key thing is, like I mentioned in the very beginning, and this is the motto of my channel, is always, there's two mottos really, but always be learning. Always be learning. Always be like a sponge for information. I'll listen to Corey and Zenzo and John Hudson and right that fish doctor guy in the UK and or the plant guy in UK. I forget his name, but I get notifications. But I'm always getting data. Always getting data. And that's important to me, to always be learning. And we have access today like we never have had. Right? When I first started in fish keeping, you got what the store owner told you, or what you could dig up from the little pamphlets they sold there, right? And that was it. Today, you've got a wealth of information. You also have, unfortunately, a wealth of bad information. Stuff that floats around on YouTube, I'm not going to mention any names, but it's not really that good and could actually be destructive. And you know, I'm not the guy that gets under the videos and talks to them about it, but so you gotta get various sources. And I tell people when they come to my channel, I go, don't take my word for it. I'm just a dude on YouTube. Get a lot of information from a lot of sources, and then make up your own mind, keeping in mind that your situation is unique to you. Your water, your substrate, your fish combinations, your maintenance schedule, your filtration, that's unique to you. And what I talk about on my channel may not work in your unique, you know, glass box. It's just a different situation. So I talked about being content with what we have. And this is probably the most important point for me. And actually, let me go back one step. Let's talk about this one. When I look at folks that have had a setback that took them right to the edge of possibly leaving the hobby, they were not prepared. They didn't have the extra tank for that fish that lost his mind or the fish that became ill. They didn't have a hospital tank. So they just sort of like toughed it out, right? Or they didn't have a backup filter when their filter failed. They didn't have the right meds. They didn't recognize, like what happened to me. They didn't know enough about illnesses, and so couldn't classify the illness correctly and treat it correctly, and didn't have the meds on hand. So there's something to be said for preparedness and also redundancy. I always recommend, except of course on a very teeny tank, but I always recommend two types of filtering on every tank, so that if one fails, the other one can carry the load while you get the other one corrected. Just a backup and redundancy, right? And the last point is the one that really keeps me going, keeps kind of a bounce in my step. I just really enjoy fielding those questions, people writing to me. And I invite you folks, if you have any questions at all. As a matter of fact, if you have any comments about today's talk, good, bad, indifferent, something you wish I had talked more about, please email me at that ben.o.cichlid at gmail. ben.o.cichlid at gmail. I want to know, because this is the first time I've ever spoken to a group of fish keepers. Live, right? This is very different from staring into a lens. Very different. And the lens doesn't laugh or smile or fall asleep. So let me know, please let me know what you liked, what you didn't like, if there's something different that I should have covered, and I'll absorb it, I'll take it, I'll respond, because like I said, I'm always wanting to learn. And I'd love to add this, talk about diversity. I would love to add this public speaking component to what I do in the fish community. So I'm sort of like flirting with it. So I'd love to hear from you what you think about that. Any questions, anything that I can address? Thoughts, ideas, questions, comments?
Do you have all-time favorite fish?
Hold on one second. Someone beat you.
What other cichlids do you own?
I own South and Central Americans. I have a giant vieja that is absolutely gorgeous. I had an azul. Are you familiar with viejas? There's one. Yeah, one's called an azul. It's the okay. Azul is the most beautiful shade of blue you ever seen, and he was a jerk, a total jerk. And I had no choice, but with a broken heart, I took him to the Aquatic Critter, which is like the premier store in Nashville, and gave him up for a store credit. And the owner looked at him and said, "Oh my goodness." He gave me a $70 credit for that fish. He was just but he was a jerk. Complete jerk. But anyway, I've got Vieja. I've got a beautiful Vieja. I've got a Salvini that is a knockout, and I've got a South Central American tank. I got a Jack Dempsey in there. I've got a green tear in there. I've got some chocolate cichlids in there, and fingers crossed, they're getting along. There's 2 Oscars in there, and I'm thinking about adding a red tear that I just acquired. So my life could get very interesting. I've got a 55 set up and ready. So I can either pull him right back out or pull out a casualty if I have to. But so I have South and Centrals. I have live bears, right? Platies, mollies, mixed with guppies. I have a couple of beautiful betta that I picked up for like $9 in Dixie cups, and they're living a great life. I also have my planted community tank, which I'm in love with. And then I keep a couple hospital tanks. I have a 29-gallon and a 55-gallon hospital tank where I quarantine fish. I always quarantine for at least 30 days. I don't medicate during quarantine unless I see something. Now, some folks that import from the Far East or something, they put the fish through a whole med routine during quarantine because they come with crazy parasites and stuff, right? So I don't do that. But if they look good in 30 days, they're active, they're eating. If they're a cichlid, I want to see some aggression. I want to see them with some swagger, and then I put them in. I put them into the tank. The picture of that eye biter, the one like death from above. Let me see if I can find it. Oh, it's the species profile. I'm sorry. That fish, that picture that I showed you was in quarantine, and right before I transferred him to the main tank, and he had gotten colorful, was coming to the front, right, attacking, eating, and I go, okay, you're ready for the big show. And so before that, he was hiding behind plants, not attacking food, doesn't come out of quarantine. So it's not just 30 days and no disease. It's 30 days and swagger, eating well, right? And if he's a cichlid, I want to see some I want to see him acting like a cichlid. So you had a question.
What would you say your favorite fish is? Maybe that you ever had or currently? No, you don't have one.
I can't answer that question.
I can't either.
It's like anybody ever see an old movie called Sophie's Choice? Horrible comparison, I guess. But I can't because I love different fish for different reasons. Yeah. I love the slow, elegant movement of a betta, and I love the fast torpedo activity of a Malawi trout. Right? Fish gets 14 inches and they're just beautiful, but they're a torpedo. They're back and forth, and so there's and I even like the aggressiveness, the swagger of some of these fish, right? Like the Salvini. The Salvini is about this big, and the Vieja is about this big, and the Salvini is the boss. He's got like all that. It's not the size of the dog in the fight, right? It's the size of the fight in the dog. That fish has a lot of fight in it. So anyway, so I love all the fish for different reasons. If you said, Ben, you can only take one fish with you, that's it. Probably maybe the Salvini. Yeah, it's just such a beautiful fish. Such a crazy fish. Or maybe that red tear I just got. Even though it's a male, the females are more dramatic. All right, anything else I can address or answer? And you've got my contact information up here. There's my email address. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and if you subscribe to me on YouTube and put on there, I saw you at ETAA, I'd love to hear that. All right?
One quick thing.
Yeah.
North Finn, you said, is Canada?
North Finn is in Canada,
Okay.
and so is Piscine Energetics. They're out of Canada. So there's my walk-off song. Thank you.